Orson and his wife, Maren, seemed to have a life that most people would admire. Orson had built a solid career as a senior engineer at a prominent tech firm, earning enough to provide them with a comfortable existence. His expertise earned him respect in the industry, and his paycheck ensured they never had to worry about the finer things in life. Maren worked downtown as a marketing manager, managing big clients and steadily climbing the corporate ladder. Her charm made her a favorite with her clients, perhaps a little too much of a favorite at times. On the surface, their relationship appeared to be a storybook marriage. They had spent years building their lives together, rooted in what Orson thought was mutual respect and understanding. Their home, recently updated with Orson's practical ideas and Maren's flair for design, was their shared pride and joy, a cozy suburban retreat with an open kitchen perfect for family meals. Every room was designed with care to create a space where they could grow old together, or so Orson believed. Their children, Elora and Ansel, were the glue holding their little family together. 12-year-old Elora was sharp and witty, with a curious mind and a knack for humor she had clearly inherited from Maren. 7-year-old Ansel, sweet and eager to please, idolized his big sister and loved shadowing Orson during household projects. Weekends were a source of joy, filled with laughter, board games, and homemade meals. Friday nights were a family tradition, a sacred time for movie marathons on the couch, complete with Maren's perfectly seasoned popcorn. From the outside, it was a picture-perfect life. Orson and Maren often talked about the future, dreaming of adventures once the children were older. They had even discussed starting a small business together, imagining a life filled with travel and eventually grandchildren filling their home. It felt as if they had everything. Yet recently, Orson began to feel that something wasn't right. It started subtly. Mentions of a client named Basil began cropping up more frequently in Maren's conversations. She often spoke about late nights at the office and ambitious projects that required her full attention, emphasizing how significant Basil was to her career. However, the way she talked about him felt different. When Orson saw Basil's name appear on her phone late at night, unease began to creep in. One evening, Maren brought up something that deepened Orson's concern. "Basil invited us to a weekend retreat at this amazing coastal resort," she said, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "He's rented out the entire place for his team, and their partners too." Orson raised an eyebrow, trying to read her enthusiasm. "That sounds elaborate," he said. "It is," Maren replied with a grin. "He believes in team bonding. This is a huge opportunity for me, and he made a point to include you. You'll finally get to meet him and the team." Her excitement was infectious, but something about the situation left Orson uneasy. A man he had never met, who could afford to rent out a whole resort, and the way Maren spoke about Basil. There was admiration in her voice that Orson couldn't ignore. "That does sound generous," he said carefully, masking his apprehension. Maren beamed and continued, "You'll love it. The resort is stunning, right on the ocean. If this goes well, it could be a turning point for me at work. Basil has this magnetic energy. He's so inspiring." Orson nodded, though her words left him uneasy. Admiration for a boss was one thing, but this felt like more. Still, he didn't want to seem unreasonable. "It sounds like a big opportunity. It'll be good for you to build those connections." When they arrived at the resort, it was far more extravagant than Orson had imagined. Perched on a cliff overlooking the crashing waves, the property looked like it belonged in a luxury travel magazine. Towering palm trees lined the driveway, and the soft hum of a waterfall mingled with the scent of flowers and sea salt in the air. Inside, the lobby was an ode to opulence. Polished marble floors gleamed under massive chandeliers. Golden light poured from every corner, and intricate sculptures adorned the space. Orson had stayed in upscale hotels before, but this was on a completely different level. Standing in the middle of it all was Basil, mingling effortlessly with the guests as though he owned the place. Which, as Orson soon discovered, he did. Tall, impeccably dressed, and exuding confidence, Basil seemed like someone who always got what he wanted. "Orson and Maren, so glad you could join us," Basil called out, his voice booming across the room as he waved them over. Extending a firm hand to Orson, Basil greeted him with a practiced grin. "Welcome to my little getaway," he said with a casual laugh. "Bought the place a few months ago. Figured it'd be perfect for hosting events like this." Orson returned the handshake, keeping his smile polite despite the growing discomfort. Basil didn't just rent the resort, he owned it. And as Maren laughed along with Basil's effortless charm, Orson couldn't shake the sense that he didn't belong. "This place is breathtaking," Maren said, her voice full of awe as her eyes darted around the grand space. She took in the intricate sculptures, the towering ceilings, and a sleek grand piano tucked into the corner. "I've never seen anything like this." Basil's grin widened at her reaction, his gaze lingering on Maren a fraction longer than Orson was comfortable with. "I'm glad you like it," Basil said smoothly. "I wanted a setting where everyone could truly unwind and connect. Make yourselves at home." The evening unfolded as a whirlwind of mingling and introductions. Basil's presence seemed to dominate the room, magnetic and inescapable. He moved from one group to the next with ease, eliciting laughter and admiration from everyone he spoke to. There was a practiced way he leaned in to show interest, close enough to engage, but not so close it felt intrusive. Maren, for her part, appeared captivated. More than once, Orson noticed her gaze following Basil as he moved around the room. And when Basil joined their circle, Maren leaned in, hanging on his every word like a moth drawn to a flame. Orson tried to tell himself it was nothing. Maren was just networking after all, but each glance and laugh she shared with Basil left an unsettled feeling in the pit of his stomach. He couldn't help but feel like an outsider in his own marriage. Later that night, back in their lavish suite, Orson was met with yet another surprise. The room was more extravagant than he could have imagined. Bigger than many apartments, with a private balcony overlooking the endless ocean. Maren seemed to be in rare form, her mood buoyant and carefree as she poured them glasses of champagne from a complimentary bottle left waiting for them. She handed him a glass, raising hers with a soft smile. "To us," she said, her voice almost tender as her eyes met his. "Thank you for coming with me, Orson. I know this isn't exactly your kind of getaway." Orson clinked his glass against hers, trying to suppress the gnawing unease that hadn't left him all evening. Maren was unusually affectionate, her touch lingering on his shoulder and her laughter light and unrestrained. She kissed him with a sweetness he hadn't felt in ages, and for a moment, he wondered if she was trying to reassure him or herself. Despite her warmth, the unease only deepened. Something about her sudden affection fell off, like a mask meant to cover up a deeper truth. He tried to shake the thought, focusing instead on the moment. She looked radiant, content even, and Orson didn't want to spoil the night with his doubts. Wrapping his arms around her, he held her close and silently promised himself to set his worries aside, at least until morning. The next day began with a fragile sense of peace. Over breakfast on the resort's patio, the sunlit ocean stretched out before them, glittering under a clear sky. It was almost enough to push Orson's anxieties to the back of his mind. They laughed over coffee and a spread of fresh pastries, the kind of easygoing start to the day that made everything feel normal, if only for a little while. Then Basil appeared. He strolled up to their table, his ever-present smile as polished and unreadable as it had been the night before. "Good morning," he greeted them warmly before his tone shifted to something more serious. "I'd like to have a quick chat with both of you in my office. I think there's an opportunity worth discussing." Orson's curiosity mingled with caution as they followed Basil through the elegant halls to a secluded office tucked away from the bustle of the resort. Inside, the room exuded power and authority, from the broad mahogany desk to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the ocean. Basil gestured for them to take seats opposite him before settling into his leather chair, his expression contemplative. "There's something I've been thinking about," Basil began, his words slow and deliberate as he leaned back. His sharp eyes darted between Orson and Maren, as if weighing their reactions. "It's a bit unconventional, but with the right mindset, I believe it could be beneficial for all of us." He paused, letting the words linger in the air. His gaze flicked to Maren, holding there just a little too long, and Orson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Basil leaned forward, folding his hands with a calculated seriousness. "I'll be direct," he said. "I'd like to spend the evening with Maren alone." The room seemed to freeze. Orson felt the air leave his lungs, his mind reeling as he tried to process the words. Before he could fully grasp what he'd just heard, Basil continued. "And of course, I'm willing to compensate you both, generously." Orson's heart slammed in his chest. For a moment, he thought he must have misunderstood. "Excuse me," he managed to stammer, his voice rough and unsteady. "What did you just say?" Basil's expression didn't waver. "It's exactly as I said. A financial offer, if you will. Consider it a mutual investment. Maren stands to gain from this arrangement, and so do you. It's an opportunity, an investment in your family's future." Each word hit Orson like a blow, disbelief quickly giving way to white-hot fury. His hands clenched the armrests of his chair, and he wanted to yell, to lash out. But as his anger surged, he caught sight of the large man standing by the door, a security guard. The man shifted subtly, his stance a silent but clear warning. Orson swallowed hard, his anger barely contained. "Are you out of your damn mind?" he spat, his voice trembling with indignation. "You think I'd even entertain something so disgusting?" Basil raised a hand, his tone maddeningly calm. "Orson, let's not act impulsively. I understand how it sounds, but this is simply business. Most people, when they consider it rationally, come to see how beneficial it can be." A shiver ran down Orson's spine as he turned to Maren, hoping, praying, that she would shut this madness down. But she wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were on Basil, her expression thoughtful, as though she was actually considering it. "Maren," Orson said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you're not seriously thinking about this." Her face softened, but only for a moment. She placed a hand on his arm, offering a hesitant smile. "Orson, just hear him out," she murmured, her tone almost soothing. "This could be a game-changer for us. Think about what this could mean for our future. Basil has influence, real influence. This could open doors for me. For both of us." Orson's whole body tensed, his hand trembling as he looked between her and Basil. The betrayal he felt was like a dagger, twisting deeper with every passing second. "You're really considering this?" he asked, his voice cracking. "After everything?" "For money." Maren's face tensed, her eyes flickering with something between guilt and defiance. She looked away, avoiding my gaze, but she didn't say no. That silence, her silence, spoke louder than any words could have. Basil, ever the opportunist, seized the moment. His voice was calm, almost soothing, as if he were explaining a business deal to a skeptical client. "This is about progress, Orson," he said, leaning back in his chair with an air of practiced ease. "There's nothing here that can't be managed. For Maren, this is just another step to secure her future. All of our futures, really." The rationality in his tone felt grotesque, surreal. It was like he was selling me on a marketing pitch for something vile, something utterly unthinkable. My anger surged, my fists clenching in my sides as I fought against the urge to lunge at him. But my eyes flicked to the guard near the door, his watchful stare a clear warning. This wasn't a fight I could win, not here. Basil kept talking, undeterred by my silence. "I get it," he continued smoothly. "Your reaction is natural. But this isn't the scandal you're imagining. It's just one night, Orson. That's all. And no one needs to know. It's between the three of us, completely private." I couldn't take it anymore. I pushed back my chair, the legs screeching against the polished floor as I braced my hands on the desk and glared at him. "You're sick," I hissed, my voice shaking with barely contained fury. "I don't care what you're offering. The answer is no." For the first time, Maren's composure faltered. Her face fell, her cheeks flushing with something I couldn't quite place. Disappointment, shame, or maybe both. But she still didn't speak. Basil, on the other hand, remained perfectly composed, shrugging with the kind of confidence that made my stomach turn. "Take some time to think it over," he said, as casually as if we were negotiating a contract. "I'll give you both until tonight." I didn't give him the satisfaction of another word. I turned on my heel and stormed out of the office, my heart pounding and my stomach churning with disgust. The morning sun was warm as I stepped outside, But I felt cold to my core, chilled by the sheer audacity of Basil's offer, and by Maren's hesitation. She hadn't said no. That thought gnawed at me, twisting in my gut like a knife as I made my way down the resort's manicured path, my vision blurred by anger and disbelief. How could she? How could we have come to this? I reached the terrace overlooking the ocean, the waves crashing against the rocks below as I gripped the railing tightly. My jaw ached from clenching my teeth, my hands trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. I stared out at the horizon, trying to steady myself, trying to make sense of a world that suddenly felt upside down. Orson, came Maren's voice from behind me, soft and hesitant. Can we talk? I turned to face her, and whatever she saw in my expression made her stop short. Her tentative smile faltered, and for a brief moment, she looked unsure of herself. Good, I thought bitterly. She should be unsure. This is insane, Maren, I said, my voice raw and unsteady. Why would you even consider something so sick? We have enough. We have everything. 2 beautiful kids, a great home, a good life. What could possibly make you want to throw it all away? Maren sighed, her gaze shifting to the ocean as she wrung her hands together. For a long moment, she said nothing, and then she looked back at me, her eyes pleading. It's not like that, Orson, she began, her voice trembling slightly. This won't change anything between us. It's just one night. And think about what we could do with the money. We could pay off the mortgage, secure the kids' futures. Maybe even buy that vacation home we've always dreamed of. Her voice grew more animated as she spoke, her words echoing Basil's promises like they'd been rehearsed. Basil's offering us a chance, Orson. A chance to have a life we could never imagine. I stared at her, barely recognizing the woman in front of me. She sounded enchanted, almost hypnotized, as if Basil had cast a spell over her. Maren, you're talking about selling yourself, I said, my voice cracking under the weight of my pain. You're actually considering betraying us, betraying our family. For money? I can't believe this. I don't believe this. She shook her head, stepping closer to me. It's not a betrayal, she insisted, her tone earnest. We're strong enough to handle this. I love you, Orson, and this won't change that. Can't you see? It's just one night, and then it's over. No one else has to know. It'll be like it never happened. Her words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I wanted to reach her, to pull her out of whatever delusion had taken hold of her. But the way she looked at me, with pity, even frustration, made it clear that in her mind, I was the one who didn't understand. No, I whispered, shaking my head in disbelief. Maren, don't you see? This does change everything. This isn't the woman I know. The woman I married wouldn't even consider this for a second. Don't be so rigid, Orson, she snapped, exasperation creeping into her voice. People make sacrifices for the people they love all the time. I'm thinking about our future, about the kids' future. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Sacrifice. I choked out. You're willing to sacrifice us for one night with him? You'd rather have his money than keep our family whole? How could you, Maren? For a fleeting moment, her expression softened, and I thought I saw a flicker of doubt. But then it was gone, replaced by a hardened resolve. This is an opportunity, Orson. You don't understand how rare it is. The doors it could open. I can't, I said, my voice breaking. I won't be part of this, Maren. This is unbearable. It feels like I'm losing you to him, and you don't even see it. Maren's face shifted, her expression a cold mix of irritation and hurt. You're being selfish, she said, her voice clipped. You're not thinking about the bigger picture. You're letting your pride destroy our future, Maren said, her voice sharp with frustration. Why can't you just see this as a means to an end? Because, Orson replied, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. Once you make a choice like this, there's no coming back. And maybe, he hesitated, the words painful to say, maybe you've already made that choice. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone by the railing. The distance between them felt insurmountable, a chasm that no words could bridge. The rest of the day passed in a heavy, oppressive silence. They exchanged only a few curt words, each lost in their own swirling thoughts. Orson's jaw was tight, his face set like stone. Every glance he cast at Maren carried a message he'd made clear that morning. If she went to Basil, there would be consequences. He wasn't sure yet what those consequences would look like, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't stand idly by while she threw away everything they had built. Maren, for her part, had met his intensity with a serene, almost placating demeanor. She nodded as if to show she understood, but her words felt hollow, her promises empty. All day, Orson's unease grew, gnawing at him like a slow-burning fire. Deep down, he feared she was only humoring him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the hotel buzzed with life. Laughter and music filled the air as guests mingled in the glowing warmth of the evening. Despite the festive atmosphere, Orson's unease deepened. Maren stood beside him, smiling and making polite conversation with other guests, but her attention was elsewhere. Her eyes kept drifting across the room, searching. And then, in the bustle of the crowd, she slipped away. Her movements were so smooth, so deliberate, that it was clear she'd planned it. A chill ran down Orson's spine as he realized what was happening. She wasn't coming back to their room tonight. Anger surged through him, a wild, helpless fury. He could already picture her walking to Basil's suite, her decision made. The thought left him spiraling, trapped by the crushing weight of what he couldn't control. Basil's influence and the hotel security made it impossible for Orson to act on his instincts, to storm into that suite and pull her out of there. He could only imagine the smug, mocking expression on Basil's face if he tried. Pacing the empty hallway near their room, Orson's mind raced. His emotions churned until a reckless idea took root. He couldn't stop Maren directly, but maybe he could make a statement, something bold and unignorable. Something that would tear apart Basil's carefully crafted plans. That's how he found himself in the hallway, matches in hand, staring at the thick hotel curtains. It started small, a single flame licking the fabric. But within moments, the fire surged, devouring the dry material with alarming speed. Smoke curled upward, dark and thick, as the flames climbed the drapes and reached hungrily for the walls. Orson took a step back, his satisfaction short-lived as he realized the fire was spreading faster than he'd imagined. The heat intensified, searing against his skin as the flames roared to life. Panic gripped him as alarms began blaring, their shrill cry echoing through the hotel. He stumbled back, coughing as acrid smoke filled the air, and watched as the chaos unfolded. Guests flooded the hallways, their voices frantic as they rushed to escape. Staff and security scrambled to respond, and within moments, firefighters were on the scene, barking orders as they worked to contain the blaze. Orson blended into the chaotic crowd, his heart pounding as he distanced himself from the destruction he'd caused. A grim satisfaction simmered beneath his panic. He'd disrupted everything. But the realization of how dangerous his act had become weighed heavily on him. This was far beyond what he'd intended. Meanwhile, in Basil's suite, the meeting was just beginning to heat up. Maren, her shirt half unbuttoned, paused as the piercing wail of the alarm shattered the air. Her heart leapt into her throat, her hands frozen mid-motion. Basil stiffened, his brow furrowing in irritation. "What the hell is that?" he muttered, looking toward the door. Maren's voice wavered as she asked, Is that the fire alarm?" Before Basil could answer, the intercom crackled to life. "Attention! All guests must evacuate immediately. Please proceed to the nearest exit." Basil cursed under his breath, straightening his shirt hastily. "Let's go," he said, his tone annoyed but unconcerned. "This place is supposed to handle emergencies. Probably a false alarm." But as they moved toward the door, thick black smoke began seeping in from the hallway. Maren's stomach dropped as she hastily buttoned her shirt and backed away from Basil. A sharp chill of dread coursed through her as she realized this wasn't just a drill. They joined the frantic flow of guests spilling into the hall. Maren's mind raced as she hurried down the stairs, a sinking feeling twisting in her gut. She couldn't stop thinking about Orson, his warning that morning, the raw pain in his voice. Could he have done this? The thought sent a pang of guilt crashing over her. She had pushed him too far, She'd seen the strain in his face, the anguish in his eyes, and now she couldn't ignore the possibility that this fire might be his desperate way of fighting back. As they reached the ground floor, the acrid smoke billowed into the lobby, swirling around the panicked guests. Maren and Basil pressed toward the exit, their pace quickening as the crowd surged. Just as they neared the wide glass doors, Maren froze. Through the chaos, she saw Orson. His face was hard, unreadable, as he pushed his way through the crowd. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Maren felt her guilt deepen, cutting through her like a blade. The weight of her choices crashed down on her, and for the first time, she truly began to understand the pain she had caused. Realizing the depth of the pain she had caused, Maren opened her mouth, unsure of what words might come out. But before she could speak, Orson moved toward Basil with a sudden, fluid motion. His elbow swung up in a sharp arc, landing squarely on Basil's nose. The impact was solid, and Basil staggered backward, his expression shifting from arrogance to stunned disbelief before crumpling to the floor, unconscious. In the chaos and smoke, no one seemed to notice what had happened. Not even Basil in those fleeting moments before he blacked out. Guests were too busy coughing, shielding their faces, and rushing toward the exits to pay attention to the scuffle. Orson turned to Maren, his eyes dark with fury and hurt. Without a word, he grabbed her arm and pulled her outside. Maren stumbled after him, dazed and unable to process the whirlwind of events. The cold night air hit her like a slap, a stark contrast to the choking heat of the smoke-filled hotel. Around them, sirens screamed as firefighters arrived, directing hoses toward the building. Thankfully, the fire hadn't spread far. Most of the damage was from the smoke. But the disruption was complete, leaving guests murmuring in disappointment and alarm as they huddled outside. Maren's head spun as she tried to make sense of everything. She glanced at Orson, but his face was stony, his gaze fixed on the ground. The weight of her decisions pressed down on her, heavier than ever. For the first time, she fully grasped the consequences of her actions. Not just for her, but for them both. As the last of the guests trickled out, tired and shaken, Maren noticed some of Basil's team members casting wary glances back at the hotel. Their faces were etched with frustration, their perfect evening now in ruins. Watching them, Maren felt the finality of it all crash down on her. She had betrayed more than Orson's trust. She had destroyed the fragile foundation of their life together. Without a word, Orson led her to the car. The silence between them was suffocating, heavier than the smoke they'd just escaped. The only sound was the hum of the engine as he pulled out of the resort parking lot and onto the winding road home. Maren's attempts to speak died in her throat as she saw the set of his jaw, the tight grip he had on the steering wheel. The drive home was steeped in darkness, both outside the car and between them. When they reached the house, Orson killed the engine and stepped out without a word. He walked to the front door, his movements slow but deliberate. Maren followed, her heart pounding with a mix of guilt and dread. As they entered the dimly lit hallway, the silence persisted, heavy and foreboding. Orson stopped, inhaling deeply, gathering himself. But before he could speak, Maren's voice sliced through the quiet, sharp and accusing. "Do you even realize what you did back there, Orson?" she demanded, her eyes flashing with anger. "You started a fire. You put everyone at risk. You could have hurt someone, killed someone." Her words cut into him like shards of glass, igniting his own anger. He turned to face her, his expression cold and his voice icy. "I put everyone at risk?" he asked bitterly. "Are you serious, Maren? Do you have any idea what you were about to do tonight? You were ready to throw away everything we've built, everything we are for one night with that man. For money." His voice rose, the raw betrayal unmistakable. "Did that ever cross your mind, Maren? Or were you too busy thinking about dollar signs?" Maren looked away, guilt flickering across her face. But she quickly steeled herself, squaring her shoulders. "Orson, this was an opportunity," she said firmly. "You don't understand. It wasn't just about the money. It was about a better life. For all of us. For the kids. Basil's influence could have opened doors for us." "Open doors?" Orson's voice cracked as a harsh, Disbelieving laugh escaped him. You think selling yourself to that man would secure our future? That's your idea of a better life. Don't be so dramatic, Orson. Maren snapped, frustration edging into her voice. It was one night. It wouldn't have changed how I feel about you. About our family. Orson shook his head, his voice hollow. Don't lie to yourself, Maren. It changes everything. The moment you even considered his offer, you destroyed our trust. You put his money above our family. You crossed a line we can't uncross. Maren's anger faltered, her expression softening into something more fragile. She dropped her gaze, her hands twisting nervously. I just wanted to give us more, she whispered. To not feel trapped, to have choices. Options. Options. Orson's voice broke under the weight of her words. What we had wasn't good enough for you. Everything we built together. All those nights, I thought we were on the same page. You were just waiting for someone to come along and offer you a better option? Maren flinched, guilt twisting her features. For a moment, she seemed to search for something to say, some justification that would make sense of the pain she saw in his eyes. I didn't mean for it to come to this, Orson, she said, her voice choked. I didn't realize it would hurt you like this. Orson inhaled deeply, trying to steady himself, but her words only deepened the ache inside him. Maren, you didn't just hurt me, he said quietly, his voice trembling. You destroyed us. Orson felt as though he was teetering on the edge of a cliff, staring out at the life they had built together. For the first time, he realized that life was already gone. Trust had been the foundation of their marriage, the bedrock of everything they shared. Tonight, that foundation had shattered beyond repair. I don't think I can come back from this, Maren, he said quietly, his voice heavy with resignation. I thought I knew you. I thought what we had was strong enough to weather anything. But tonight, I realized I was wrong. You showed me exactly where I stand in your life. And it's not where I thought I was. Maren's face crumpled, her hand reaching out instinctively toward him, as if she could physically pull him back from the brake. Orson, please, she whispered, her voice breaking. This isn't what I wanted. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. Can't we fix this? Start over. Orson took a step back, avoiding her touch, his expression hardening. Fix what, Maren? How do you rebuild a marriage when there's no trust left? I don't even know who you are anymore. Her eyes widened, glassy with tears. Orson, don't say that. Please, she begged, her voice cracking under the weight of her regret. I know I was wrong. I know I hurt you. But don't throw everything away because of one night. One night, Orson repeated, his voice thick with emotion. That's all it took for you to throw me away. That's what hurts the most, Maren. You made your choice. Now I have to make mine. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating, a heavy finality hanging in the air. Maren opened her mouth as if to argue, to plead, but the words wouldn't come. For the first time, she seemed to truly understand the depth of the damage she had caused. The rift between them was no longer one that could be bridged with apologies. I can't live like this, Orson said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't look at you and not see tonight, not feel this betrayal. I thought we had forever, Maren. I thought you were my partner. What tonight? Tonight you showed me I was just an option to you. Tears spilled over Maren's cheeks as she stared at him, her lips trembling. She wanted to promise she could change, that she could somehow undo the damage. But deep down, she knew it wasn't possible. What was broken between them couldn't be repaired. Orson turned toward the stairs, his footsteps heavy with the weight of his decision. Maren took a shaky breath, her voice trembling as she called out after him. Orson, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But he didn't turn back. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, each one carrying him further away. With every step, Maren felt the distance between them widen, a chasm no words could cross. She stood frozen, wrapped in the silence of her regret, realizing she had lost not just the man she loved, but the life they had shared and the trust that could never be rebuilt. The divorce was swift, a quiet and mechanical process that starkly contrasted the emotional storm that had led to it. They divided their assets with the same practical approach they had once used to plan vacations or family projects. Orson kept the house, and Maren moved into a modest apartment nearby to stay close to the kids. Custody was split evenly, ensuring that Alora and Ansel felt supported and loved, even as their parents now lived apart. By some stroke of luck, the hotel fire never came back to haunt Orson. The flames have been contained quickly, causing only minor damage. No one ever traced its origin back to him. It was as though the fire had burned away the last of his desperation, leaving behind a strange, bittersweet peace. Orson threw himself into his work, and more importantly, into his role as a father. He took a new position at a smaller, family-focused engineering firm. The pay was less, but it allowed him to be closer to home and to his kids. He made sure he was there to pick them up from school, help with homework, and tuck them in at night. He poured every ounce of his energy into creating stability for Alora and Ansel, determined to ensure they never doubted how much they were loved. Maren moved forward in her own way, though the weight of her choices lingered with her. She remained committed to her children, doing her best to be present during her time with them. But the warmth that had once defined her family life now felt distant. She carried the heavy burden of regret, a regret that deepened each time she saw Orson. His steady resolve and quiet strength were a reminder of what she had lost. Though their lives continued, shaped by their new reality, the scars of that night remained. For Orson, it was a lesson in resilience, in rebuilding a life from the ashes. For Maren, it was a painful reminder of the choices that had cost her everything.